Hello, and welcome to Reawaken the Dream, a course for the writer mom or anyone who has to write in little tiny fragments of time because you don't have any big blocks of time where you can sit down and write. This is lesson 33, and we have finished our character traits, and we are on our first universal element, first of three. And we are doing a very, very exciting celebration because this is lesson 33 of 35. We're almost finished with the course. And we are also celebrating something very important. We're celebrating our third superpower. The first superpower was the power of connecting threads, way back in the first unit when we used the Zettelkasten note box to keep track of where we were in our writing. Our second superpower was the power of living characters, and we spent a long time on that using all 28 character traits. And now we're talking about our third superpower, the power of command. Only this superpower is not one that I can give you. It's one that you have to look inside yourself and discover, wait a minute, I've just done 33 lessons out of 35. I have just spent 2/3 of a year working on this course and committing to it. That proves to you that small fragments of time do indeed add up to something big, because you've just about completed the entire course, Reawaken the Dream. So celebrate. We're going to celebrate a little bit each of these three last lessons because celebrating is super important when you really, really accomplish something. Well, let's do a very quick review of what we covered last week when we did our last of the 28 character traits. We took a look at humility, and humility is a balance variable, which means there are two sides to it, two potential loss states. We looked at the struggle, and we said that the animal model for humility was the pack comfortably hanging out, just doing their own thing. And we also looked at how humility is intertwined with so many other variables. Humility has to do with understanding a package of gifts that are given to us. They're not things that we did for ourselves, and so we can't feel glorified in them. And if we didn't get just the package we wanted, we should not feel diminished for not getting that. And we've looked a little bit at how it was intertwined with all of these other character traits: sincerity, magnanimity, gratitude, and especially honesty. And we did spend a little bit of time talking about how it's confused with humility, because how it's confused with meekness, because very often meekness is perceived to be oh, I'm nobody. And sometimes that's people would think humility is as well. Whereas we know meekness is one of the attention variables, traits, and the meek individual can be content within themselves and look out for the needs of others. Whereas humility is a proper assessment of the gifts that one have been given. They're really not very much alike once you really dive into it. So the two lost states, just very quickly, are feeling glorified in your gifts that you did not do for yourself, or feeling diminished. And victory is not measuring and not comparing. Well then, what on earth is our first universal element? Well, it's not a character trait. And one of the ways that we show right away that our first one is not a character trait is that we're doing something a little bit different here. Usually when we start our scenarios, I give you the name of the character trait, and then I give you the scenarios. This time, I just ask you, I'm going to give you the same 4 scenarios, but I'm going to ask you at the end of it, what is it? This is not a difficult quiz. You're going to know what the element is very, very quickly. But Let's follow this plan because the other two are going to go the same way. Oh, Sharon could not take her eyes off of little sleeping Oliver, his tiny little body in his little crib, all snuggled up in his little onesie. It was hard to imagine that someone could perform surgery on such a tiny, tiny little body. She was so glad to have him home, but it was still hard for her to look at him in his crib and not remember all the tubes coming out of him and all the sounds of all those monitors all around. She could barely take her eyes off of him. The doctor did say they fixed the heart problem and he should have a completely normal life. But, it was so hard for her to trust that the monitor was working. Yeah, the monitor is working. She had a hard time tearing herself away and leaving his little room for him to sleep. What is it? It's a club for boys. You can't come in here. What? Don't feel bad, Lynette. It's a boy thing. It's okay. It's just a boy thing. This one isn't for you. Oh, but a tear started coming down her cheeks. Her brother had never left her out of anything before. Oh, Lynette, don't feel bad. But now she was sobbing. Can't we let Lynette in? She's as good as any guy. Well, then I don't even want to belong to your club. Come on, Lynette, let's go home. What is it? Martin was beyond belief happy. Yes, it was spring, glorious spring. Yes, the weather was perfect. Yes, he was slipping into his car, but it didn't have anything to do with the spring weather. He was on cloud nine. The night before, Katrina had said yes to his proposal of marriage, but this morning he was so full of dread that he could barely get out of his car. You see, he had promised Katrina that he would ask for her hand in marriage, and he was terrified to ask her father. What if he said no? Well, he had been to his meeting with her father, and he had called him son and had embraced him. Wow, Katrina would be his wife. What is it? Dr. Grayfield, PhD, was wandering among the rows and rows, banks and banks of gurgling tanks with all the bubbly sounds, each tank filled with cute little zebrafish. Oh, these zebrafish. Dr. Grayfield was over the moon about zebrafish. It was already late in the evening, but he really, really wanted to get these test results logged before he left. Why, he was studying now. These little guys were one of the most studied animals in the whole universe. And now he was studying their gut microbiome. Why, he was sure it would give tremendous information about our microbiome, our human microbiome. Already they'd learned so much about gene expression and cell proliferation and tissue cell growth, and he was over the moon with his precious zebrafish. What is it? Well, do I have to tell you? I'm sure I don't have to tell you. I'm sure you guessed that it's love. Now, this should say analysis of love, but I couldn't make myself write analysis of love. You can't really analyze love, although we're going to kind of pretend to do so. So I wrote thinking about love on this page. Love is not a character trait. There's no triad of emotions, although we'll talk through it as though it had a triad of emotions. Doesn't really. Let's see why it doesn't have one. First of all, let's take a look at the struggle. Well, love can never be a rudder trait. You can't decide to have love or not have love. You don't get to make a choice like that. It can never be in the rudder position. But every choice that we make, every choice that our character makes, shows something about what our character loves. Shows us, too, if we think about it, the state of our heart. So it pervades every decision that's ever made by man or character, but it itself cannot be decided upon because it's not a character trait. Well, let's continue the analogy. Okay, I'm ready to write analysis of love now. Loss. Well, love is never inaccessible. Never. But it can sure get buried. So we have to kind of protect love because there's so many things that can damage our ability to give love and our ability to receive love, because love comes from both sides. It's a giving and it's a receiving. So we can see how pride can damage love, because pride puts blinkers on ourselves. We can't see the other person. If we can't see the other person, how on earth are we going to love them? Ingratitude, much the same way. If we're crediting ourselves for things that are actually gifts, why, how are we going to give proper love? How are we going to receive proper love? And that's the difficult thing about the loss state here, where we start losing track of love. The individual who cannot get out of himself, as we can see with these two, has a very, very hard time giving love. And if the character cannot give love, then he cannot understand being given love. Now, that doesn't mean that he cannot be loved. It's that he cannot understand being loved. Many times, he might just be oblivious to being loved. But if he comes face to face with being loved and he has these attitudes, well, it's going to throw him into cognitive dissonance. And for a moment, it's going to be like, what? What? What just happened? And that can create a little crack in the pride and the ingratitude and the indifference. And plant a seed that can lead to a real longing for love, which can then make the individual more open again, our character more open again to being loved. But there are some nasty ones that can really, really, really do damage to a character's ability to love and be loved, feel loved. Hatred. Oh my goodness. Hatred is such a strong emotion. If we let our characters, if we create a character filled with hatred, that's going to drive out just about everything. No space left for the character to understand love or being loved. Spitefulness goes in that same direction. Not quite as strong, but pushing it. Nursing grudges pushes us towards that same direction. Discord, building up conflict where it doesn't need to be. Envy. Man, that's a great one if you want to give your character something. Oh, that great one. Envy. Instant punishment, no reward. And makes it hard to love or feel loved. And likewise contention, which is very similar to discord. So there's so many ways that we can bury love under a pile of rubble. But the reality is, we can never really totally lose it, but we can sure lose our awareness of being loved. And that's something that we can write into our stories for our characters. So then, what is the victory state? It's nothing that we can produce on our own. We can't do that. We can only remain open to love. So we can see that it is not amenable to a struggle. Its lost state is illusory, although very, very present in our lives, and the victory state is not under our control. It's not a character trait. Well, does love have any modifiers? Well, how about scale? No, there's no concept of scale because you can't measure, dissect, or compare love. So there is no scale. There's no agency either, but our limiting self-beliefs can do the same damage that some of those traits that we wrote in blue can do to make an individual feel that they cannot be loved. The damage that can be caused by growing up in an environment of rejection or conditional love, which isn't love really at all. If it's conditional love is like dog training. Here's your little treat of love. Or some families, our character might have grown up in a family where love was given out willy-nilly with no rhyme or reason. Maybe the parent has emotional difficulties, and when their emotions are buoyant, oh, they're full of love, and when the emotions go into depression, then rejection. This can be enormously difficult for a character to get through and get past. So limiting self-beliefs coming out of a difficult upbringing can definitely seem to have an effective agency, but it's just perception because love is really available at all times and it is never out of reach. So, as I promised, these elements, you can't really write a story without them, but it is important to note that they are not, in fact, character traits. So, next week, we'll cover another one of these grand elements. But for our second part today, I promised you a complete sort of a grand review of the character traits. And we're going to take them this time from the top down in a logical fashion. We took them across the 28 weeks. We wanted to build up a set of emotions. Like, do you want to take the dog for a walk? We wanted to have the word loyalty conjure up in our being a set of emotions related to loyalty. So we took one character trait a week and we played with it from an emotional level. In fact, the only organizational plan for the way the character traits were presented was from easy and less triggering, shall we say, up to more difficult, more nuanced, and more likely to cause a triggering type of a reaction. Now we're going to take it from the top down. Since emotions were the big thing we wanted to play, we wanted to let emotions guide it. Now we're going to let reason guide it for our review. And so we're going to look at it in terms of, could you do kind of a sort things out and come to the right character trait, all the way down to the character trait? And I assert that you can, because there's an actual taxonomy that will go with the character traits. So let's take a look at that taxonomy at the outermost level. At the outermost level, we know from all that we've done that we have 4 groups of character traits. But did you realize that those 4 groups of character traits deal with 4 different kinds of struggles that go all the way back to primitive man and even back reaching into the animal kingdom? And so the first type of a struggle that you could easily think of is man against the world. You know, you've got to find food, you've got to find water, the hill is hard to climb up, the river is wide and the current is running, and you got to get to the other side. So man against a hostile physical environment gives rise to the character traits in the group that we've named the resilience group. That's their common struggle. Another common struggle is the struggle to live comfortably in one's own skin. I think we've probably all had experiences of really rather not being in our own skin at a time or two. And we gave that group of character traits the name the balance traits. Another group had to do with how can we correctly judge our circumstances? Can we look around us and understand what's going on? Can we make reasonable predictions about what might come to be? Understanding group, we gave the name the insight group. And then the big one, the one that had a jillion character traits, had to do with living in community, ourselves in relation to other people. And that we gave the name the empathy group. Now today, we'll take this taxonomy one more level, but we'll wait till next week to take it all the way down to the character traits. So we're going to focus in on these character traits groups. For example, we said that resilience has to do with living in a hostile physical environment. So I drew this. This is planet Earth, and this is you, or me, or our character. And it's the character dealing with all of the giant Earth, where the character feels very small in relationship. And that we gave the name the courage. That's the courage subgroup, where the character feels like the underdog in relationship to the whole hostile physical world. Well, it's entirely possible that at some point in time, our character might start feeling like he's on top of the world. He's got a new car, he can go at great speed, he can get from here to there very quickly. That gives rise to another subgroup within the resilience group, which we'll give the name the power subgroup. When the balance has shifted, our character starts to feel in control of things. That's all there are in the resilience, because it's against the world. The world feels big, I feel big. That's the subgroups that are available. In the balance subgroup, which is living in one's own skin, we have 3 subgroups. One of the subgroups is the self-regulation subgroup. And the self-regulation subgroup has to do with, well, how well does a character do at getting himself in hand and making himself do what he wants to do? So here's our little fellow carrying his gym bag and going into the gym. He's making himself go to the gym and work out. See, that's what he's doing to do a better job of living in his own skin, is he's working on self-regulation. Another subgroup in the balance group has to do with how much attention does our character need. And now you see all these other people, but that doesn't make it an empathy subgroup, because this is the character thinking about himself in view of getting attention. How does our character relate to either giving attention or getting attention? But the emphasis is on what's going on in the character's head. How does he live in his own skin? The third subgroup in balance is the self-assessment subgroup. And this is where our character takes a good serious look at himself and decides, is he going to judge correctly about what he sees when he looks inside himself? And those are the subgroups for balance. Now, insight was our little bitty group. It has one subgroup. How can you have a subgroup that's the same as the group? Oh, well, it does. And its all about understanding the environment and what's going on around one, and that's the wisdom subgroup. This is our character up standing on top of a hill with binoculars in his hands, and he's getting a clear view of what's going on around him. That leaves our giant empathy group, which has 4 subgroups, the most of all. The first of the empathy subgroups is the dependability group. To what extent can our character be counted on to be where he said he would be and just go through his life reliably as he relates to other people? So I symbolize this with our character holding a to-do list. But in this case, it would be a to-do list for others because this is an empathy trait. So everything's in relationship to others. The next subgroup in empathy is the sociability subgroup. How easy is it to live with our character? Does he deal comfortably in relationships with others? The next subgroup is the response subgroup. How does our character respond when good things come his way? Here he is carrying a thank you note to put in the mail is our symbol for this subgroup. And the final subgroup in empathy is called the honor subgroup. This is our character saluting his country's flag, and that has to do with, does he give honor as it is due in relationship to others? So this is our review for this week. Next week, we'll take some discriminating questions that will break each of those subgroups all the way down to the individual character trait. And the idea is that we should end up with a list of questions that we can ask ourselves that will enable us to say, I got a character floating around in my head, and we can watch, how does he do when he's just all by himself? Is he comfortable in his own skin? Oh no, what? And we'll be able to answer the questions and figure out what character trait are we seeing in our character. That's the reason why we're taking this top-down approach. So we'll finish that off next week, and we'll take our second universal character trait and our second week of celebrating, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.